Hello, class, and welcome to Unit 2 review. And again, we picked another great day. Last time we did it on Super Bowl Sunday, and now we've done it on Oscar night. But at least this way you'll get a little bit of leeway before Unit.
Getting some crazy sound.
Yeah.
You hear that? Sounds like alien.
A lot of fun.
Oh,
So,
it's okay now.
Okay, it's gone. What just happened?
I don't know. Every once in a while, I think maybe when I was talking to Craig, I heard a little bit of craziness, and it was I think your speed sometimes dips, and
Right.
one of the ways in a live conferencing that they'll deal with that is to kind of cut the audio quality down further and further and further, and it gets that squealy sound as it tries to jam all of your words in at once. But
Got it.
it sounds like someone's banging on pots.
Yeah.
And we had such a nice, smooth start. I guess we should probably get going. And I'm sure this is fine. I mean, we don't have any live viewers right this second, but anybody who's joining us for the playback, please feel free to forward through the first couple minutes of this. So, how should we start?
Maybe we should talk about the creative projects.
Let's talk about the creative projects. Who wants to go give your observations from your grading?
I don't have tons to say about it yet. I've started grading, and I'm impressed with the work that the students are doing. And I know it's a lot of detail to take in, but it's just really important to follow directions and remember that you're not being graded on how great a composer you are. You're being graded on the quality of how well you approach this project and work in detail and put in your best work.
Yeah.
And the analysis is crucial.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we do it this way is it helps us balance. It's a fairness issue. A lot of people come in with a lot of musical experience, and they're great at performing. So if we make a big chunk of your grade how well you performed or even how well you notated it, that's a huge advantage for someone who has had musical training in the past. But for novices, what you need to realize is, we're really interested in what you have to say about your decision-making process, about your melody. The analysis plays a much larger role in this than whether you played it wrong. If you had a couple wrong notes, you might lose 5 points out of 100. But if you didn't answer 2 or 3 of the questions that we asked you to answer, or you didn't cite evidence from your melody where you answered it, you're going to lose a lot more points there. So you can do very, very well in this. And what I'm noticing is there's a lot more parity between students who have had training and maybe students who haven't in terms of the scores they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
What are your observations?
Well, the 2 things I would add, sort of reiterate the directions following bit. We had a lot of people. I had a lot of people lose a point or 2 by transposing incorrectly, or by changing octaves in the middle of the transposition to avoid legend lines. So be really careful that you're following the directions absolutely to the letter, and that you're not taking any shortcuts there. But I think the biggest thing you can take forward in Creative Project 2 is just organization of the analysis. It's been a problem for a lot of the students where they haven't quite got the knack of how to organize their answers. And some of the most effective ones I read, the students simply copied out the question they're trying to answer, wrote a paragraph beneath it, then wrote question 2, wrote a paragraph beneath it, and organized it that way. And that works really well. I think that's easier than trying to turn it into a long narrative. I had some students who tried to write about a page just full flowing through. And I think it'll actually help you if you put the breaks in separate things by question rather than try to make it read like an essay, because this doesn't have to be an essay. Think of it more as a series of short answers than one long one.
It's actually easier for us to grade as well because we can see exactly what you're responding to.
Yeah, and you know, if part of the issue is if you write a long narrative, we don't always have a sense of where in your melody you're referring to. So we really kind of want to know, all right, this is the specific spot in my melody. Breaking up by questions helps that. But if you look at the rubric, one of the key things that talks about for getting that outstanding score is definitely listing, giving evidence from your melody. You know, telling us that, you know, leaps are more emotional and steps are more calm. That's fine. But what we want to know is why you chose to use steps there. Why did you think steps were going to further your musical goals? Why are the leaps there? Why are they furthering your musical or emotional goals? So that's the kind of information we needed there. And if you don't cite from your melody specific places, not only do we not have any idea what you're talking about, but it becomes very difficult to really give you a score for really breaking it down, because we don't see your thought process. So definitely, we want to see your thought process. We want you to support your thought process with evidence from your melody directly.
Yep.
So have we beat that drum enough? Should we move on to? What do you think?
Yeah, let's jump into Unit 2.
Okay.
And this, for many people, is the toughest unit. I always like, this is my repeated refrain, but I always like to remind people that it took people back in about 1,000 years ago when they invented music notation. It was a bunch of monks and nuns mostly, and it took them about 200 years or more longer to invent rhythmic notation than to invent pitch notation. And I always think that's not a coincidence. It's much harder to capture music, the rhythm of music, than it is to capture the pitch of music visually. And so the system that they came up with is brilliant and it works really well, but it's the result of an evolution, not a systematic, perfect, ideal way of doing it. And so it works for musicians, but it has some things that are inherently confusing and kind of strange about it that take some getting used to, like time signatures and things that
beams
somehow are just really, and beams that somehow just, they're kind of brain twisters. And so if you're feeling a little lost or confused, don't feel alone. You're not alone.
I think one of the big problems that I'm running into with students across the board is the issue that a lot of the terms we use for rhythm are similar to terms you use in other aspects of life and in math, but aren't the same. So there's a spot on the website where it reminds you multiple times that time signatures are not fractions.
Yeah.
You know, it's difficult sometimes for an amateur musical reader to talk about a quarter note in 3/4 no longer being 1/4 of the bar. So a quarter note in 3/4 is a third of the bar, as opposed to 4/4 being a fourth of the bar, a quarter of the bar, but we don't stop calling it a quarter note. So some of the confusion comes from the fact that we have these terms that are shared with other, I almost said genres, with other fields, but they're used in slightly different ways, and that can cause a lot of confusion.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So you sort of have to take these terms and to some degree relearn them in this new context, and only take them as far as they go in this context, and sort of get used to. There's a certain amount of memorization of kind of just quirks or things that are strange about it. You just have to remember them. There's really no other way, because they kind of have these inherently illogical qualities. But at the same time, there is a logic to the whole thing. It's not like it's completely random by any means. Like, once you get your head around it, you'll see that it all makes total sense in its own weird way. So have faith. Should we just look through some homeworks?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the ones we should maybe. Well, I don't have the course shell open. I don't remember. We got the new numbering system now. I think I'd like to see us pay particular attention to 10, 11, and 14.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just looking at 11 because this is sort of where the rubber hits the road. I agree. So let's start with.
I guess just to reiterate, 10 and 12 are the assignments specifically that we pull questions for the exam from.
Mm-hmm.
Just so I think we should definitely hit those, but 11, really 10 through 14 are the ones people have trouble with. So
I've got 10 up. I can switch over to sharing view and we can do a couple.
Sure, let's go.
Sounds great.
Let's do.
I'll get 11 ready to go after that.
You got it. Okay, can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, so simple and compound meters, homework part 1. So the difference between simple and compound meter is something that a lot of students do have problems with. If you think about simple as being a division into parts of 2 and compound being a division of parts of 3, that gets you halfway home. So the first question, simple meter, if the beat was a 16th note, the beat would divide evenly into into which of the following? So we have a 16th note. We're in simple meter, which means the division is going to be into 2. If we smash that 16th note with a hammer and create 2 of things, we would get 2 32nd notes. Whenever you move up or down a division, you're adding or removing a beam or a flag. So the 16th note has 2 beams. Something that is half, when you break that into half, you get 3 beams. If you combine 2 16th notes, you would get something with 1 beam, which would be an 8th note.
And just to add one quick thing, beams and flags are exactly equivalent in terms of their meaning and their function. Occasionally people say, well, I have a beam, but do I need the flag? And they're really the same. It's just the flag is when it's not attached to another note.
And beams are really useful because in actual printed music, beams almost always represent an entire beat. So later on, when you're doing things like adding bar lines or defining beats, beams can be really useful because things that are involved in one entire beat tend to always be beamed together. Okay, so we jump to the second one. Simple meter, if the beat was, that looks like a half note, the beat would be divided evenly into the following. So we start with the simple meter part. That means 2. We say, okay, we have a half note. What 2 things go into a half note? And that would be 2 quarter notes. Let's find a compound meter one. In a compound meter, that my internal clock now says 3. If the beat was a dotted quarter, the beat would divide evenly into which of the following? Now, this is an interesting one because I think a question was posted to Piazza about this particular one. And technically, there are 2 correct answers to this. Now, the answer I believe we're looking for, because compound meter is, puts us towards 3, is 3 eighth notes. 3 eighth notes adding up to be 1 dotted quarter note. Of course, you know the dotted quarter note is a quarter note, which is 2 eighth notes. The dot, it's like multiplying it by 1.5. You take half of that into the end, giving you 3 eighth notes. So the answer we were looking for, I think, was these 3 eighth notes on the bottom. Could you have chosen A? Technically, that does divide the beat evenly, but that would be a simple division because it's a division into 2. And we at least strongly implied when we asked for compound meter that we wanted the divisions of 3.
Yeah, that is a tricky point because simple versus compound sets the entire context for what you're doing, and they're really kind of 2 different worlds. And so when you see a dotted rhythm, a dotted note like that dotted quarter, and it's being treated as a beat, as a whole beat, that dotted quarter takes up an entire beat. That usually implies that it's compound meter, and it implies the triple division. And that's one of those things that when you get used to it, it makes sense, but at first it can be confusing because you can also see a dotted quarter in a simple meter. So it's one of those things where you have to get used to looking at the whole background context.
Now I'll do one more example, and I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to do this one and figure out the answer without even looking at the choices. So all the information I need is up here. I have compound meter. That means my answer is going to be 3 of something. And the beat is this funny thing with 1 flag. Now, because I know I'm dividing things, remember what I talked about earlier, going from adding a flag or removing a flag? Without even looking further, I know the compound meter part tells me 3, and the 1 flag here, because I'm dividing it, my answer will have 2 flags, or 2 beams. So if I go down, I'm going to get the answer that has 3, that's the compound part, and it's 16th notes with the 2 beams, and I knew that before I even looked because I knew I was breaking up an 8th note, and 8th notes, which have 1 flag or a beam, break down into something with 2 flags or 2 beams, which is the 16th notes. I think
so those 2 questions are kind of the same but at different scales, almost like you're doing the same thing, but
I think those are the hard ones. If there's anything else we want to do in example 10, we can, but I think that's... these are just text ways of asking the same question in a simple duple meter. So simple means 2, duple also means 2. So this is 2 beats that are divided into 2 parts. If the beat equals an 8th note, a beat divides into, you would then say 2 16th notes. Because the beat is the 8th note, it is simple time, so it's going to be division of 2, and the 8th note divides into 16th notes. Okay, do you think that covered it?
Yeah, I think so.
Excellent. I will stop sharing.
Do you want me to jump on 11?
Sounds good. Now I can prep 12.
Okay.
In the meantime.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see. Should say tuplets, beat divisions, and subdivisions. Yes?
Looks good.
So this is kind of a direct follow-up on the previous one. You're just working with, again, with durations and how they divide up. You're kind of going the other direction now, working backwards. Basically you have the way that a beat is divided up, and you have to say what is the full beat. And this can be tricky, especially this first one. That is called a duplet because you have the 2 in the little bracket. And tuplets in general, basically what they represent is, I like to think of them as a borrowing. Let's say you're either in compound or simple meter, and a tuplet is a case where you're borrowing temporarily from the other one. So if you're the most common tuplet is a triplet, and what that means is that you're in simple meter, which is the most common type of meter, where the beat divides in 2, and you're temporarily borrowing a triple division of the beat, which is the compound division. So you put the little 3, and you pack 3 notes into the space that 2 notes took up. And so the same thing is happening here, but in the other direction. A duplet almost always occurs in a case where you're in a compound meter, so that the beat divides into 3 equal parts, and you're temporarily borrowing a duple. In other words, again, duple and simple mean the same thing. They both mean that the beat divides into 2 equal parts. And so when you see a duplet, almost always it's dividing up a beat, which is from a compound meter, which therefore has a dot. So that's a long-winded way of saying you see a duplet, usually a single beat in that situation is a dotted note of some kind. So that kind of rules out boils down the options here to either the dotted half note or the dotted whole note. And the other thing about tuplets is that they are usually smaller note value than the beat that they fill up. So in this case, a dotted half note wouldn't make sense because it's the same note value as the duplet half notes. So I'm going to go with the dotted whole note. So you have to do it. The other thing about these, is, as you saw in the last example too, you often have to go through several mental steps. And just like a math problem, it doesn't hurt to show your work, at least to yourself. We're not going to see it, but absolutely use scratch paper and map it out for yourself and scribble and take notes and go crazy, because the more you can do all that stuff explicitly and have it clear in front of you, the easier it is. we have done this all our lives, so we can do it in our head, but there's no reason you should be able to do it or have to do it in your head. Here's another one. How many of these are there? 6 eighth notes is a subdivision of which of the following durations? Notice also this says division, this says subdivision. That's an important distinction as well. A division is where you're dividing a beat up once. A subdivision is where you're dividing the divisions up. So again, that adds yet another step here, but at least we're not dealing with tuplets this time. So notice that we're kind of skipping a level. We have eighth notes. If you took off the beam, they'd become quarter notes, which is kind of the next level up. And there's no quarter notes in the answer. We're jumping right up to half notes or even the next level beyond that, and that's part of the fact that it's a subdivision. So again, you have to remember that there's this middle stage, which is the quarter note, and that's the division. So you kind of have to do 2 steps. So how many eighth notes? There are 6 eighth notes. That would equal 3 quarter notes, and then that's the key point you need to get the answer. So if this equals a total of 3 quarter notes, which of these answers adds up to 3 quarter notes? And it's the dotted half. And so this is a division into 3 quarter notes and then a subdivision into 6 eighth notes. I'm probably being more long-winded than I need to be, but it feels like there's all these little micro steps, and you really have to be clear on each one of those. Maybe one more? Or what do you guys think? I don't want to belabor it, but this is
I think we should. I think we should push on.
Okay, that sounds fine. So again, just the micro steps. Don't neglect them.
Okay, shall I burn through assignment 12?
Yeah.
Burn it down.
Burn it.
Okay. Do you have me in?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the time signatures homework, and this has caused problems for people in the past because many of you were taught a lie when you were young when learning time signatures, which is that the top number is the number of beats per measure and the bottom is what gets the beat. And while that works perfectly well in simple times, it does not work in compound times. So 6/8 does not have 6 beats in a measure, despite what many of you may think based on what you were, that little simple method you were talked about. So the compound meters are going to have 6, 9, or 12 at the top. Those are easy to remember because they're all divisible by 3. And whenever we talk about compound, 3 is our magic number. Things have to break down into 3. So I'm just kind of going to do an overview and then we'll do some specifics. I know this is compound, 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 simple. Hey, 2/8. Simple. These are all simple there. Compounds at 6, compound, simple. And I can go on like that. So the top number gives you all the information you need to find out if it's simple or compound. 2, 3, and 4 are simple. 6, 9, and 12 are compound. So let's see this a little more specifically now. We have 6/8. What note value receives the beats? Okay, so when you have a compound meter, to find the number of beats per measure, usually you divide the top number by 3. So 6/8 has 2 beats per measure. It's actually easier just to memorize it. You know that 6 at the top means 2, 9 means 3 beats, and 12 means 4 beats per measure. Then the next step is to take 3 of the bottom things and bump them together. So 6/8 has 2 groupings of 3/8 notes. 3/8 notes together gets you the dotted quarter note. And whenever you have a compound time, again 6, 9, or 12 on the top, your answer for what receives the beat is going to be a dotted something. So right off the bat, I knew it was going to be dotted eighth, dotted 16th, or dotted half, because compound always means 3, and 3 in musical terms at least always requires a dot, because we don't have any native length that is non-duple. 9/16, how many beats per measure? That's easy, that's 3. Because the 9 on the top divided by 3 is 3. 9/4, I know there's 3 beats in the measure. What note value receives the beat? I'm going to take 3 of the bottom number. The 4 equals quarter notes. 3 quarter notes together equals a dotted half. So this meter will have 3 groupings of 3 quarter notes or 3 dotted half notes, with the dotted half note getting the beat. 6/16, we have 6 16th notes in the measure. This is a duple time. If we group together 3 16th notes, we would get a dotted eighth. There's a pattern to that grouping too. When you group together 3 of anything, you bump it up 1 level and add a dot. So if I have, back here I had 3 quarter notes grouped together, I bump it up a level from the quarter to the half note, add a dot, dotted half. This was 2 groupings of 3 eighth notes, bump up the eighth note up a level to the quarter, add a dot, dotted quarter. Let's do a duple one. How many beats in the measure? This one's easy. It's 2, because the top number is 2. What has 4 beats in the measure with the duration of the quarter note? That would be 4/4. 4 beats means it's a quadruple time. We don't know offhand yet if it's simple or compound until we see the note value. But if this were a dotted quarter note, it would be 12/8. Because it's a simple quarter note, then we can put 4/4. And that's more or less it. One question we sometimes get is, why isn't 3/4 a compound time?
Or
And
3,
the answer,
yeah,
or
same.
3/8 for that matter, or 3/16. When you have 3 on the top, generally speaking, you're counting each of those 3 things as a beat. So 3/8 is 3 eighth notes in the measure, with the eighth note getting the beat, and the eighth note is subdivided into 2 equal parts, which would be 2 16th notes each. It's the subdivision that makes 3/8 a simple time, not a compound time, because the compound division has to be 3, and the simple division is 2. So 3/8 has 2 16th notes per beat. You know, there are certainly fast 3/8 times or fast 3/4 times, like a waltz, where it has a triple feel, but that doesn't change the fact that when you get right down to it, those are simple triple times. Okay, anything else on this one?
Sounds good.
No, I think we're good.
I've got number 13
Okay.
ready to go if you want me to jump on it.
Jump away.
Jump. All right, so this one we get a fair number of questions about. This is kind of like, okay, you get the time signatures, now how do you actually work with them and with music, filling them up? And this was a brilliant design by Dr. Wilcox of a way for you to actually manipulate the notes on the staff and still use our handy eCollege system. So this is pretty much a subtraction and addition problem. Every measure has a fixed number of rhythmic value that fills it up, and it can have no more and no less than that value. And you're given some values and then some missing values, and you have to fill in the missing ones with just the right amount of value, no more, no less. So you start by figuring out what is the total value within each measure, and it's always going to be the same. It's not going to change from measure to measure. And then figure out what value do you already have in the form of these red notes, and then basically subtract and figure out the remaining value that you need, and then how to fill it in. So let's start with the first measure. There are 9/8. There are 3 beats. Each beat is a dotted quarter, a total of 9 eighth notes. 9 eighth note values are 3 dotted quarter values. And we have 1 of those dotted quarter values already. So subtract 1 from 3. You have 2 dotted quarter values remaining. And the trick with this is always to use the largest possible rhythmic value that you're given, that's available to fill up the thing. So in other words, don't take like 40 of these things like this, because yes, it could add up right in the end, but it's not the way you're actually going to write the music. So pick the largest value that fits, and in this case, it's a dotted half, which is 2. I'm going to put it right next to the arrow, which is the value of 2 dotted quarters. The next one's a little trickier because there's some more addition you have to do. Still 9 eighth notes possible, or 3 dotted quarters. So the way I would do this one is revert to the eighth note value, because I can just sort of go through and count one by one. So I'm just going to count up to 9 and see how far I get. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, a quarter is 2/8, so 4, 5, 6. Now each 16th is 1, so, or each pair of 16ths is 1, so let me start over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, 8 out of 9, I'm almost there. I just need 1 eighth note. Boom. And sometimes you have to add them in before the other things. So this is kind of a giveaway. You already did this the opposite in this earlier measure, so I'm going to add a dotted quarter. That adds up to the correct amount. Now this last one's tricky because it looks like the measure's almost filled up. I'm going to follow the method I did over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now what's going on here? Okay. 16th note, sorry, 16th rest is half of an eighth note. The dot is half of the 16th note. So that's actually 3/4 of an eighth note. And I need one more quarter of an eighth note, which is what? That's tricky. This is actually challenging my own very impressive theory knowledge, but I'm going to go with a 32nd note. I hope my fellow professors will correct me if I'm on a lark here.
Looks good to me.
But so this is tricky because you have to really be comfortable with all of those divisions and know exactly what everything's worth, no more, no less. And so then you would, don't forget this last stage. This is where you actually get your points. You enter the code in the box. I, D, G, A. Boom. And should we do one more, or do people get the idea? I want to find one that has, if possible, that has the notes that, oh well. In some cases, there's been some confusion where some notes can't have a, oh no, I'm thinking of the beamed homework, never mind. Ignore what I said. Okay, so I'll go to page 2 really quickly. This is adding bar lines. And again, it's like if you know the time signatures, you're going to be fine with this, and it's really about being very methodical. Whenever we see mistakes in this one, I think it's usually because the student hasn't sort of slowed down and been methodical enough. I think all of you absolutely can do this just fine. Just don't rush it, because it's easy to make a mistake, but it's also very possible to get it right if you're careful. So again, it's just a matter of addition. You need to know the total value that you can have in a measure, and just make sure that you have that full value before you put in a measure line, a bar line. So 4/2, bottom number is 2, means a half note gets the beat, and there are 4 half notes. So I'm just going to go 1, then each pair of quarters is a half note. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to put the bar line after that. Like so. 1, 2, 3, 4, bar line after again. Again, this would be a great case where if you aren't absolutely confident with it, take a sheet of paper and just write it down and add up numbers. Just say, like, write in the numbers next to it, 1, 2, 3, 4, and make sure you're absolutely right. And don't worry if there's only 2 bar lines in an example, because sometimes that's going to happen, as it did here. Don't feel like you have to fill it up with 1,000,000 bar lines.
And I'd also add that you should work from the back forward also. You have a final bar line there, so if you've made a mistake somewhere in the body of the exercise, then your last measure will not be correct. So if you end up with a random extra beat, that means there's a bar line off someplace.
That's a really great point. That's an excellent way to check. In fact, I should do that. So working backwards, this is a beat, another beat. Now I have 3 notes within a beat, because it's a quarter and 2/8, and another 3 notes within a beat. So I do have 4 beats. So I'm feeling confident on this one. I'll just do the first 2 bar lines of this one really quickly. So dotted quarter is 3/4, is 3 eighth notes, another eighth note, another quarter. That's a total of 3 quarter values. I'm going to stick in a bar line. Quarter, total of a quarter, another quarter, stick in a bar line. Working backwards, this one dotted half note is an entire measure, so I know there's a bar line there, and you could continue like that. Some of them look a little thorny, but if you're methodical, you'll be fine. Anything else?
Looks good to me.
Cool. What does, since I
getting
have
on
it? Yeah, we want to try to end tonight as promptly as possible, and 5 minutes over. So, should we worry about this one? This is the
most
credit.
difficult one.
This is the most difficult one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you? So we
Let's do a couple of examples, and then we can call it.
Yeah, go ahead. You got it up. So.
Okay, so just as unlong-windedly as I can muster, this is what Dr. Levesque said earlier on in tonight's session, that very often, a beat is all joined under one beam. So you can sort of think of that as a pretty reliable rule, that one beam equals one beat, and all the notes within that beat get joined under one beam. So that's why this is laid out the way it is with all these different combinations, because each one of these can make up a beat or some combination of a beat. And this is what I thought I was going to tell you in the earlier one that I wanted to find. I forgot it was in this other homework. But some notes can't have a beam. And so if there's a quarter note or a half note, music notation doesn't allow there to be a beam on it. So that's why they're marked red, as kind of as a reminder to you that you shouldn't try to put a beam on it. But for the ones that you can, so again, you're adding up, you really have to know your time signatures, and you have to know, as Dr. Levesque pointed out, that in 6/8, in compound meters, the top number is not the number of beats. You divide it by 3 to get the number of beats. So 6/8 is 2 beats. And so you need to sort of fill up the measure first, figure out how many notes you need, which is actually given right there, and then put in the beam for that complete beat. So notice that there's one beam for the entire second beat of this. Now it gets thorny. You have to really be careful here. So 2/16, 1/8, 2/16. That's a total of 3/8, which is one beat. Now you have to find it down here, and you see how much easier it is to read all of a sudden. You can see exactly which notes belong together. And for the second one, it goes like this, and so on. And then I could continue, but again, don't forget to put in the code, NBA, if you're a basketball fan. Okay. Should I do another one, or are we good on this?
Well, one thing I would just mention is it will really help you if you take some time to think about the time signature before you start this. Don't reinvent the wheel with every exercise. There are a limited number of possible answers in a closed set like this in the rhythm. So when you see 6/8, you want to think to yourself, what kinds of things am I likely to see in 6/8? What groupings are possible? Because once you've done a number of 6/8 examples, you've probably seen every possible 6/8 rhythm. There's only a very limited number of rhythms. And some of these things are not going to be common. So, for example, in the example we're looking at, in 6/8 time, 2/8 notes beamed together alone is just frankly not going to happen very often because, again, beams equal beats.
Yeah,
and
so
in general, you're going to have groups of 3. Now, of course, there could be a rest or something like that that makes that sort of a truism false. But the point remains that if you think about the time signature ahead of time, and if you think about the kinds of things you're likely to see in 3/4 versus 6/8, that will help you sort of pre-sort some of the answers. So you're not looking at a giant, vast palette. You're instead looking at a smaller subset of things that are likely to happen in that particular meter.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's also important to, with this one, a way you can double check your work, or just something to double check for, is make sure that you are actually matching the values correctly. Like first of all, as Dr. Levesque said, this doesn't really belong in 6/8, so you wouldn't be using this one. But if you were using it, see how it doesn't actually match the notes above it. This is a 1/8 and that's a 1/16. So double check that too, just to be sure that you're not mismatching. And again, the red notes are marked that way as a reminder that just because you cannot beam those notes. Anything else to add?
And one word on the red notes. If you see red notes, there's a good indication that you may have to use an eighth note with just a flag, without a beam. In fact, if you see that, it's almost for certain. I think if Professor McQuan, let me switch and let him talk, because I think he has one you can see.
Well, like in this first one, it shows you a typical pattern in 6/8 of an eighth note plus a quarter note, which is one beat together, and they can't be beamed together, but they actually form a beat. This is another good example from a simple meter, 3/4, where this is a little bit of a tricky case because it looks exactly the same as this example, right? 6/8 and 3/4, but we're telling you that one is a compound meter with a beat equaling a dotted quarter, and in the 3/4 case, one beat equals a quarter, and this is actually sort of breaking through that boundary. So if you added this up, you'd have eighth note. In order to make a complete beat, this next note really should be an eighth note, but it extends past the boundary of that eighth note into the next beat, into the second beat. So what you basically have is a beat and a half, and in order to fill out the beat, you have to add another eighth note, and then together these three notes make up two beats. But you shouldn't beam. What you shouldn't do, which you might be tempted to do, is to use this one, because that does add up correctly, but what this actually ends up being is the way you would notate 6/8 and not 3/4, because you'd have, beat 1, beat 2. So let me just show it as it should be. This is actually a slightly tricky example, so I'm glad Dr. Wilcox brought it up. What you should do is, that's beat 1 and 2, and then bring in beat 3 with a pair of eighth notes.
I have a similar example for compound if you want to jump over to my screen for a moment. So in this example here, this is a compound. As much as I can zoom in. We have a compound meter that starts with 4 unbeamed eighth notes. So the temptation is to group all these together like so, but this is the kind of rhythm you would see in 3/4. And the correct way to do this would actually be 3/8 notes plus the 1/8 note. So you can clearly see the two groupings of 3/8 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And similar in the second measure, we would want to complete that first grouping of 3/8 notes before going on to finish that up, rather than what some people are going to be tempted to do, which is to group those two followed by those 4. Again, this would look beautiful and perfect in 3/4, but it's not correct in 6/8 because we always need to see the two groupings of 3.
The difference between 6/8 and 3/4 is probably one of the top 5 trickiest things in this course. Like just figuring out why are those two things different when they have the same number of eighth notes in them. And we could probably have a whole session just on that. So if it's confusing, don't worry. There is again, it's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, whoever invented this system was not being consistent, But there actually is a very good reason for it, musically speaking, and in terms of the way music sounds and functions and the way we play and think about music. It's just on the surface, it's looks contradictory at first. So have faith that all of this makes sense. Anything else? Or we're getting past our due.
Yeah, I think we're done, and
I think we've covered the basics. We're here for questions as always, and I was going to say you should all go vote, but I don't think New Jersey is in the Super Tuesday.
No, we got a ways to go.
Stephen, you're a little off screen.
What?
You're a little off screen.
Am I?
I don't know.
We're
Oh, I
missing
have-
Tom.
I'm still here. Yeah. Yeah. If you're gonna vote for my guy or girl.
That's right.
Let's not go there.
Vote for me.
Vote broadly for the person I want to win.
That's right.
Yeah.
They will do the things you want while taxing the people you don't like, whoever that happens to be,
That's
or
right.
not taxing and doing the things you want anyway.
Yay!
Yay!
All right.
Go sports.
I'll
Okay.
talk to you. Seriously.
All
I'll
right.
talk to you all later.
Okay.
All right.
Have a
All
nice
right.
night.
Bye.
Good night.